In August of 1778, General Washington received an unexpected letter from a lieutenant in the Continental Army named Caleb Brewster. That letter hasn't been found, but from Washington's response to it, it seems like Brewster was providing naval intelligence on the British fleet. He ordered Brewster to have a strict watch kept upon the enemy's ships of war and give me the earliest notice of their sailing from the Hook. To obtain speedy and certain intelligence of this matter may be of great importance to the French fleet at and the Enterprise on Rhode Island. Washington placed Major Benjamin Tallmadge of the 2nd Continental Light Dragoons in charge of Brewster's findings and later recruited a smuggler, an old friend of his, named Abraham Woodhull, to spy on the enemy between New York and Long Island. A few months later, Washington received a letter from John Jay. In the letter, John Jay says, "This will be delivered to you by my brother, who will communicate and explain to your excellency a mode of correspondence which may be of use provided proper agents can be obtained. I have experienced its efficacy by 3 years' trial. We shall remain absolutely silent on the subject." That new mode of correspondence was called the sympathetic stain. It was a new form of invisible ink that had been developed by John Jay's brother. And here at the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown, we figured out how to make it. Invisible writing was not a new concept in the 1770s. European spies had been using things like citric acid and milk to disguise secret correspondence for a long time, and using it was fairly simple. Citric acid, or milk, was applied to paper, just like regular ink, and then left to dry. To render the ink visible, the recipient would simply have to apply heat to the paper. The heat would burn off the ink, and the paper would turn brown or black. With enough practice, it can be done with relative ease, but there was a risk. If the heat was applied too close to the paper, it could burn the message completely, which would defeat the purpose of using the ink in the first place. James Jay decided to fix this problem. In another letter from George Washington to Major Benjamin Tallmadge, dated July 25th, 1779, he states the liquid in number 2 is the counterpart which renders the other visible by wetting the paper with a fine brush after the first has been used and is dry. This type of counterpart is confirmed by James Jay himself in April of 1806 in a letter he wrote to Thomas Jefferson after the war. He is quoted as saying, "It occurred to me that a fluid might possibly be discovered for invisible writing which would elude the general known means of detection and yet could be rendered visible by a suitable counterpart." In the book Washington's Spies by Alexander Rose, the author claims to have found a potential formula for James Jay's sympathetic stain. And according to that formula, this is what it was made of: gum arabic, ferrous sulfate, gallic acid, and finally distilled water, which I totally forgot. We forgot distilled water, so. I dropped it.
Yeah, I know you dropped it.
Go! And last but not least, distilled water. The proposed formula in the book Washington's Spies calls for 10 grains of gum arabic that is to be dissolved in roughly 60 grains of the gallic acid. Now, I know this probably isn't exactly 60 grains, but I did find that it turned the color of pale straw, which is evidently what we're looking for. It should have that slightly yellow color. Now, once both of those are mixed thoroughly, the reagent is going to be roughly 30 grains of the ferrous sulfate dissolved in about 8 ounces of that distilled water. You can see here I'm using a whisk to bind that together, but I've also used just a spoon from the kitchen. That seemed to work fine. And I'll be honest, for a lot of my experiments, I didn't exactly stay to that formula. I found that as long as everything is mixed thoroughly, it does work. Most of the time. Also, the paper that you see me using here is a very thick laid paper. You can't just pick up printer paper or loose leaf out of your desk. It has to be a very specific kind, and Washington talks about that as well, sending very specific types of paper to his spies so that they can use it. It also cost Congress a lot of money, and they weren't exactly happy about that. But as you can see, the word invisible has now been written on that paper. I took it outside so it can dry, and that was a whole lengthy process. I'm very impatient. Alright, now that the paper is mostly dry, I'll zoom in here. You can see the word invisible is mostly invisible. I think it's because some of that reagent was already on the paper, but no, Washington said to use the reagent with a fine brush, but I actually found dabbing it on there with a rag is a little bit better. And you can see it's pretty instant. The moment that rag hits the paper, bam, there it is. Now, because I already had reagent on the paper to begin with, this is what it should look like. I got a fresh sheet of paper. I made sure that it was nice and clean. I made sure the quill was clean. No reagent was on the paper. My hands were clean as well. So you can still see it a little bit, but understand Washington spies were not just writing this invisible ink on blank sheets of paper. I mean, it was going to be written in between lines of written text. It was going to be in the margins of notebooks. So it's really something you would only see if you were trained to look for it. But here we go again. We're going to use that reagent, and yeah, just like before, it's pretty instant. Now, it's debatable whether or not this is exactly what Washington spies had, but it is pretty darn close. If you'd like to learn more about Revolutionary War espionage, come visit us sometime at the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown. See ya.